Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the final segment of Salaam Britain of today. Our next guest is a Birmingham-based GP and chair of council at the British Islamic Medical Association, mashallah, who has dedicated his work to supporting the health and well-being of Muslim communities across the UK. He joins us today to talk about something many of us experience, but don't always fully understand. And it's stress. I think that's a big, big topic. He will be helping us unpack what stress does to the body, why it's on the rise, and how we can manage this stress in healthier, more sustainable ways. We are really pleased to have Dr. Qasim Javed with us today. Assalamu alaikum, doctor.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Very welcome to you. So, doctor, as a GP, what are the most common signs of stress you see in patients, especially the ones people tend to ignore?
So, absolutely, stress is something that I will see on a regular basis as a GP. And my clinic, sometimes the patients that are coming to me are actually not even aware that they are suffering with chronic stress. And that's because it can be quite tricky to pick up. There are, various signs of physical health and even mental health that can be affected. And underlying really is elements of chronic stress. When you think about, symptoms physically, stress can manifest in different ways, things like headaches, things like tiredness, raising the blood pressure, even things like gut disturbances. So, often people are becoming more aware of things like irritable bowel and having kind of variations in how your gut is working. We can definitely see signs about how that's linked to something like stress. And mental health, of course, we know that where people are suffering with stress on a regular basis, frequently experiencing stress and worrying about stressful things, it can certainly impact in terms of things like depression, anxiety, and really where the patients are coming into my clinic, the worry is that I see them more so at the latter parts of all of these things. Mm-hmm. So when people are really suffering with long-term elements of stress, they might actually present to me with something like high blood pressure, or they might actually present to me with something very physical like diabetes. But really, although I can, adjust things in terms of medications and do some tests, when we scale things back and look at some of the underlying reasons that things like their eating habits or things like their coping mechanisms are perhaps not quite where we want them to be, we realize that the underlying cause is often something related to stress that's happening in their lives and causing these things to happen, and it's manifesting physically or mentally, and that's where I see them in clinic, really at quite a late stage.
Right. That's very actually informative to know, doctor. Thank you for that. But now, people react to things and to situations very differently. We are different. We perceive things differently. We understand things and life very, very differently. What makes people more susceptible to stress than others?
It's a very good question. And I think there's two or three elements to that question. With stress, realistically, when I give talks on stress in the community or even to my patients in the consultation room, I always start with, have you ever experienced stress? And everyone will say, absolutely, yes, I have. And that's almost a funny question to ask, because we know everyone would have experienced stress. It's a normal body function and response to certain situations. We need stress at certain times. Sometimes people know it as a fight or flight response, or a way of kind of responding to certain intense situations. Maybe when you're rushing to get to the train, or maybe when you're coming towards exam season as a student, or when you've had some difficult situations at work. And a short period of stress with some release of hormones like adrenaline, cortisol, things like that is totally normal for the body to do. Where we're running into issues is where we're overactivating that stress response, and we're constantly releasing some of those hormones and not actually finding a way to dampen things down and tell the body to rest and recuperate. Some people may have developed mechanisms, and their ability to actually deal with stress can really help them in the long term. And I always give this analogy that we could have two people in the same workplace with a very similar family situation and various responsibilities, but their ability and coping mechanisms to handle the stress that's coming their way can be totally different. And that's why their outcomes, both physically and mentally, can be completely different, even if they had the very same situation. And so there are certain, tricks, mechanisms that can really help us in terms of managing and coping with stress.
We're going to reflect on the mechanisms and how to deal with the stress in a few minutes. But first of all, there is something else I wanted to ask you about, Doctor, and it's cortisol. Where is cortisol in all of this? So you mentioned adrenaline. Adrenaline, that's the hormone that we need when we are stressed to prepare for an exam. So we have that huge motivation overnight sometimes to just prepare for the exam and get it done, or to do something very urgent. That's that hormone we need. But where is cortisol in all of this?
It's a good question. And I think the way we should think about all of these hormones is actually that the body is very intelligent. Alhamdulillah, Allah has created us in the best of fashions. So things like cortisol, adrenaline are important hormones for the functioning of the body. When we wake up, we should have a surge of cortisol to get our day started. And actually things should start to calm down through the day. It's the adrenal gland pumping this hormone around to get things going, calms down during the day, and then we should have another surge a little bit later on, and then calms down overnight. And adrenaline is something in similar fashion that should be just short bursts and surges during these important, intense situations, but really should be calming down. Where we're running into issues is, of course, where these hormones are just constantly being pumped around the body, and where we're entering this high stress zone, even unnecessarily, when we're just doing things like going to work or at college and doing our regular daily activities, and our body thinks that actually we should be in the maximum fight or flight mode. And that, over long periods of time, releases things causing sugar surges, causing blood pressure raising, making the heart rate go faster, the breathing rate go faster, because these are all important functions during an intense situation. But of course, when you're just supposed to be doing your regular work and day job, shouldn't really be being activated.
So can cortisol, like if it's included in the stress mechanism there, can it affect, for example, the loss of weight, perhaps, or other kind of vital functions in our body?
It's a very good point you've made, because actually we know that chronic stress can lead to issues with weight gain and having difficulty to actually manage a healthy weight. Cortisol is likely an important factor in that, because we know one mechanism of it is to release more sugar into the body. Naturally, that should be a good thing at certain times. We need the sugar boost in our bloodstream to activate us, give us energy. But if we're actually releasing that unnecessarily, and it's then being stored and causing us to increase weight, then it becomes that unhealthy response. And what we're seeing there is a poorly regulated body system.
What I observe, with many of us actually is people sometimes gain weight because of stress, or they go through, a mere group of chronic diseases, and the core reason for that initially was stress, but sometimes they are not aware of that. They were just, because I'm getting old, perhaps. And they don't see it as a stress or a chronic stress, work-related sometimes, family-related, relations-related. So how first of all, to be aware of what's happening to us and to our body?
This is really important, and I tell this to a lot of people. The first way that you might manifest this is often unrelated to a stress, but actually could be physically. And people who come to my clinic in GP, or people I see in the community, often the complaints that they might have might be quite non-specific. Things like, tiredness all the time, poor sleep, issues with the gut, as we mentioned. And although we will still look into a lot of the physical health causes of that, we often run some tests, they might not actually find anything very, very clear to suggest why they're experiencing that. And that can sometimes be a very good sign for us to pick up as GPs and doctors, that actually is there an underlying stress which is causing the person to feel like that. And I think one, undervalued element, perhaps in modern society, and definitely, medically speaking, is the overemphasis on looking for the physical aspects of things, looking for tests, looking for investigations, and actually treating the person more holistically and thinking, okay, what's going on in their life? Yes, they might have, a specific medical condition like diabetes or like high blood pressure, but aside from just the test, the medication, are there other factors that could be contributing to this person's well-being, their overall health, and how they're actually feeling day to day? And that's really where stress should be an important aspect of any discussion, because we know it will enter everybody's life to some degree. And in the natural busy world that we're in now, and the stressful elements of the world, it will be, likely increasing. We know that actually for a lot of employers, it's the number one cause of sickness and being off work. So to some degree, every discussion should be factoring in how are you coping with stress at the moment? Are there any stresses in your life at the moment?
Yeah. So obviously, as a human being, we are sometimes after quick solutions, let's be honest. And what we do sometimes, if we feel uneasy or a bit down, low energy, we recognize sometimes there is stress. So we rush to some supplements and we self-medicate sometimes. So what's your take on this? Is it efficient to treat the stress by some kind of supplements, maybe because they are trending on social media?
This is something that we're seeing quite a lot in clinic. A lot of people asking about supplements. There are, to a good degree, some supplements which are effective and good for our general health and well-being. Things like vitamin D I recommend across the board. And I know that social media has a lot of encouragement about various other supplements. But I always start with patients, let's keep it simple initially. That's the sort of the 5% or 10% at the end we should be thinking about. Initially, we should dig back into the actual main crux of what we form our well-being from. Namely, these things you could think of in four broad areas. Your sleep, because that's really important in terms of the overall well-being of your health, your recovery in terms of stress. Your eating, because we know that what we consume and what we put into our body has a massive impact on how we're doing. Yeah. Your physical movement, if you're not moving, if you're not releasing good, healthier hormones like dopamine, serotonin, and having good outlets of stress, then you're going to have a lot of other health issues. And lastly, your recovery. And this is where actually, we're very fortunate, alhamdulillah, to be speaking on Islam channel, because your recovery can incorporate a lot of things. Modern science is showing us a lot of benefit in terms of things like meditation and mindfulness. And alhamdulillah, we have a lot of good aspects of the religion to actually find small moments and small pauses in the day to really find recovery and galvanize ourselves. So always keep it simple. The supplements are a really important aspect for some people, but actually just those four areas to really think about in terms of what's contributing to your overall health, and digging into those can find many more solutions, which has long-lasting impact.
Right. Just to make it clear to our viewers, stress is going to be existing in our life anyway. This is something that we can't avoid. It's part of our life. But then it differs from person to a person if they are ready and they have that recovery mechanism, they're prepared for it, they understand, they are honest with themselves, they understand what their body is going through. So the recovery system, I think this is a very interesting thing to talk about today. What it is exactly and what are the components of this system, how can we develop it and how can we embed it in our subconscious so we can get it like as an automatic system to use when we are stressed out.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're talking about this, because I think this is the key in how we can really look to tackle stress. Having a recovery system or plan is essential in the modern life, and it's something that we're probably all missing to some degree. When you think of stress, that's the output. The input to that is our demands, okay? So things like your family pressures, your work pressures or college pressures, certain events that just happen and you can't do anything about, financial issues or housing issues. The demands are unfortunately always going to be there and are quite tricky to change to some degree. But what are the counteracting mechanisms? Really, we should be thinking of a recovery system and methods to counteract these things. So as well as recovery, our support and our aspects of control. So support is things like your family, your friends, people at work who you can actually talk to in a positive social light. And we know that this has a really beneficial effect, having a way of communicating the issues you're facing. And sometimes taking those few minutes after work to discuss with your family or your spouse about some of the stressful aspects of your day, to just have that outlet, can be really effective, and something that we undervalue. And we know men in particular do struggle with this in terms of, releasing some of that stress that they've built up through the day and actually having a healthy outlet. The recovery systems that we should be thinking about are there any pauses in your day that you can implement already? Because this is an easy win. Are there a 5 to 10 minute period in the day that actually you can implement, which is not related to work, not related to the pressure and demands of your day, and purely for yourself? You don't necessarily need to be doing something high energy and engaging. If you can, as I said, physical movement is a really good, healthy strategy. So whether that's a short walk,
With
in your lunch
walking,
break.
yeah, exactly. Short
Yeah,
walks.
absolutely. It has a huge positive effect. We're lucky now there's a bit of a change in season, so we can make use of that. It can be more physical exercise. We know that people who are running, people who are using the gym, these kind of things. But the lowest and easiest way to get involved is just walking. A simple walk can do wonders. But still, the recovery at its most basic fundamental idea is just a period to stop doing high pressure work, high pressure family things. And a 5 to 10 minute ask is something we can all implement. Ideally, it should be about a 30-minute aspect of the day. But if we have a 5 to 10 minute period away from stress, some element of quiet reflection, if you can incorporate an Islamic aspect to that, that's also going to benefit, no doubt, in terms of, dhikr or reflection, or reading Quran. All of these things which we know from our religion, the answers are already there, actually will, improve us in many ways. But just some aspect of the day where you're implementing a concerted effort to have recovery alongside your support network and alongside some aspect of control, because we know that that's also important, and a slightly trickier one. But sometimes people feel more stressed when they feel there's a lack of control in their life, whether that's things to do with the workplace, whether that's things to do with the financial pressures of home, all of these things. So if you can increase some aspect of control in your life and something that's just for you, something that only you're doing, we know that this is a good way of counteracting stress. And although it might start quite simple and quite small, over time that system can grow, and importantly, it's counteracting all the harmful effects of stress.
Right, amazing, amazing, doctors. Now, let me ask you the question that everyone is looking for. The easiest, the fastest solution. If I'm stressed now and I want just to cool down very, very quickly, what should I do? First thing to do.
Always, if you look at any intervention, it is within NHS guidance is some form of exercise, and that's been quite honestly, to the point. So it's not some kind of new supplement that's been released. It's not some kind of home remedy. It can be talking to people and things like that, but we know that, some form of physical movement is always a really constructive way of dealing with stress. As I say, that can be as simple as just a small walk, 20 minutes or so just in your lunch break or something like that. But somehow you need to counteract these things by releasing the endorphins, releasing the dopamine, getting some positive energy, and coping with the stress in a much healthier way than, perhaps going on your social media, maybe tuning into the TV, all of these unhealthy mechanisms, which, or even, sugar cravings and eating, all of these unhealthy mechanisms, which will only compound things and increase the stress over time.
Very useful. And this reminds me actually of a quote of Rasulullah. I'm just going to say the general idea of it. So if you are angry, when you are angry, if you are standing, just sit down. If you are sitting down, just stand. If you are inside, just go out. So change the position you are in. And you said movement is very important when you are in that situation of anger, of stress, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the answers are all there for us. And that's why we're so fortunate. So we can put these simple interventions, simple ideas into our day-to-day, and importantly, take a proactive approach. If we take this proactive, preventative approach, it's much less likely that I will have to see people in clinic with, much worse physical issues that we touched on, because really we want to prevent that happening with chronic regular stress.
Absolutely. Now, Doctor, what role can community spaces like mosques or youth groups, local initiatives play in reducing stress and supporting well-being, perhaps?
there's a huge role for community organisations like the ones you've mentioned, in terms of the mosques, in terms of youth clubs, to proactively talk about stress. So an example might be something like with the British Islamic Medical Association, we work closely with mosques around the UK actually to do something called Mind Savers, which is all about mental health training and dealing with these kind of issues and getting it out into the community. Importantly, we need to have these conversations out in the community, so then this information and awareness is there for people to learn from. In fact, our entire conference this year is for BEMA is labelled Living Well, Restoring the Balance. And it is all about restoring the balance to some of these issues that we're facing in health, to try and bring back a more holistic view of health in terms of these aspects that we've touched on. So once we start having these conversations with other mosques and with other youth clubs and organisations, that's how we'll get the information out in the community that we need to be proactive and on the front foot to try and deal with these issues.
What point should someone consider speaking to their GP or a professional about stress, and what does that first step look like?
Yeah, this is still really important, because there is definitely a role for speaking to your GP with stress. As I said, sometimes it's not always obvious, but if you are experiencing these kind of physical or mental health more non-specific concerns, there could be something that we need to dig deeper into, sometimes with tests, but sometimes with just looking back at, aspects of your day-to-day which could be contributing to these symptoms. And importantly, with stress itself, if you're regularly experiencing stress, it's affecting your day-to-day, it's affecting your workplace, you're constantly feeling overwhelmed and high intensity, come and speak to us at the GP surgery. There are different ways we can deal with it, whether it's that through talking therapies or counselling, or actually talking about ways to deconstruct some of the four aspects of your health and well-being that I just touched on. So these are kind of different ways that we can help tackle the stress with you in a consultation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Doctor. And again, for our viewers, if you feel that you're suffering from stress, or your health is deteriorating, your health condition is deteriorating somehow because of stress, just go to your GP and consult your local GP. The experts should give you the right advices and tell you what to do. Exactly, our conversation today was to tell you what is stress and how can it affect your health. These are just general information, and if we dig down, deep down, I'm sure we will unveil lots of other details about how the stress affects your body, and it's different from a person to another.